Perfect.
Great.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, so it was it was a difficult task force. I think there's a lot of varying um, opinions. There's some things where, things that didn't get in that I wish they would. But this was the things we could get consensus around in the limited time we had. I think the timing was a huge challenge. I think, especially given the breadth of the charges for the task force, there were a lot of topics, a lot of them really complex. And so um, it was, yeah, it was a challenge, but I'm glad we got somewhere and have some recommendations. I can talk a little bit about kind of next steps if that would be helpful. And then you guys can, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'd love to hear feedback. So I will be introducing a bill. We've all talked it over. I'm going to be introducing it. It's going to just start with the language of H879 from last year as passed by the House. So that will be introduced early on. And I will likely be the one presenting it on the floor unless there's some things I find myself really, really opposed to and just can't. Obviously, I'm not going to present a bill if I'm not going to vote for it. So Teresa, I know, plans to take this up early in this year because we really want to have the full 2 years to try and be able to negotiate as much as we can. The political playing field is a lot different. So it's going to be a lot of work. We are not going to get everything we want, but I'm really committed. This will be my focus the next 2 years, is really having conversations with people, both in my caucus and others, to really try and push people as much as we can.
Jubilee, you said you're going to use language from 879. What did you mean by that? Are you going to?
Oh,
Yeah.
the starting bill as it's going to be introduced is going to be an exact copy of H879 as passed by the House.
Oh, so
Um,
you're going to start with that then?
that's what we're starting with. Yep.
Okay.
So I'm going to introduce it and we're going to take it up pretty early on in our committee. First year of the biennium, there's a lot of, especially in my committee, we're going to have 5 new people. So there will be a lot of like 101 type testimony about all of the different agencies that kind of are in our jurisdiction. We'll get a lot of presentations. And then so we're wrapping that up. My understanding is this bill will be one of the first ones we'll take up. I don't have a bill number yet, but we'll soon, next week most likely.
Okay, great. Joy, would you like to start with the questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So which committee is this task force recommendations going to?
It goes to House Human Services.
Okay.
It goes to Senate Health and Welfare. Um, and then it goes to both, the similar to the housing committees in both the House and Senate.
I see. Okay. Okay. Um, and I just wondered, I was at the Chittenden County Homelessness Alliance meeting yesterday, and one comment was made about the recommendations that it was hard to have those abstentions. I'm imagining the abstentions and the votes were from state agency people, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering if that's going to mess with the credibility of the recommendations at all.
Yeah, they voted yes on one measure, and then otherwise they abstained from voting. And that was yes, the members from who was there appointed on behalf of the commissioner and then the deputy commissioner. VHCB, we started out with Polly Major, who went on family leave. And then there was a couple, sessions where, we had one person fill in and then no one. And then in the final weeks, we had Elise Greaves, who is kind of a newer employee there, join us. And so she abstained from all votes.
Mhm. Do you think that'll affect the credibility?
I don't think so. I mean, their take, at least from the administration, was that um, they couldn't vote on things without seeing, because they all had budget considerations. And so um, I don't think, they're counted as kind of like not voting. And yeah, I don't expect that to mess with the credibility at all. They'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about their positions in the legislative session, particularly as we get a better idea of budget considerations.
Well, I particularly wondered if that would affect um, the recommendation of eligible households being allowed to stay in motels until they basically have somewhere to go or homelessness is resolved,
Mm-hmm.
and shelter during an appeals process.
I mean, it's, I mean,
Do you think that will be accepted? Is that going to be a big fight to get that
oh,
particular?
that, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's always been the kind of the big issue, is how long we serve people. I really like where we landed with this, because within it, it provides our state an incentive, because the average length of stay is, we house people in it for the average length of stay per year. And if we can move that average length of stay down, that's less than we have, overall. Right now, it takes more than a year for someone to get housed, so they would be housed the full year. But if we want to shorten that amount, then that requires us to really focus our efforts. So yeah, it's one that's going to be a huge fight. And I have done a lot of work, and a lot of people have, and I think a lot of the folks returning, who may have thought differently at the start of last biennium, have really learned a lot, including leadership. So I think it's, in that regard, it's a much more friendly environment to have leadership, or the current leadership, in support. But that it's a much steeper hill we have to climb this time, without a supermajority.
Mhm.
So Jubilee, I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to kind of start in the back of the document, uh,
Yeah.
about strategies, because as I was I was associate director at Charterhouse, Low Barrier Shelter, and
Yeah.
a couple things that strike me are the discussion about strategies. Okay, so we're strategies to reduce reliance on motels or emergency shelter.
Mhm.
That sounds to me like it's calling for the larger strategy, uh,
Yeah.
but you didn't actually say that. So can you just talk about, first of all, what that is, and also who is going to produce that?
Yeah, let me look it up. I mean, that one, I believe,
I think it's number 12. It's in
it
section 12.
is, um, yeah, I'm just trying to pull it up. That was one of the more difficult ones. And in terms of priorities, here we go. I think people really wanted to focus on those things like eligibility, length of stay, etc. So the ones we got to, that was one of the ones we didn't really get a chance to focus on until the end. I think we talked about some of it throughout, but we didn't really have. There's just so much. It's like I believe that could have been a task force on its own.
Yeah.
So we did not we don't have these aren't official recommendations. We never took a vote on any of these. So we, and there's some in there I feel really strongly about, and others, that aren't as important to me. So what we decided to do is just include them all, and just put them in the legislature's brains. And that's something, those are things that we will look more into as a committee this coming year.
Well, in your committee role, were you a fan of HR 829? Did you vote for it?
H879. I Yes, I did vote for it.
Okay.
There
I'm
were
sorry. I'm talking about the 10-year strategy that,
okay. Yes, I did end up ultimately voting for it. There's things that give me
Okay.
pause. Um, I I think for me the biggest hang up with that one was around service dollars. And I really believe that services and housing are so intertwined, but should be administered separately. I think if your services are coming through your housing provider and you build that relationship and that trust, if something happens, if you're headed for eviction, your service provider, like that relationship gets severed, and that can be really traumatic. And I think it kind of is against what Housing First tells us. So that I struggled with a lot, and had a lot of conversations about that. But I I did ultimately vote for the bill
okay.
overall.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, so the fact that you said that providers and housing providers and services should not be combined. So you, in terms of shelter, would support separating those two things, case management from the housing provider then?
I mean, in long-term housing and
Right.
like
Yeah.
permanent housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Okay.
know there's the SASH for all kind of
Yeah.
model
Uh-huh.
is, a thing a lot of people are pushing for. And I absolutely see the need. I've been a property manager as well as, direct service. And now
Yeah.
I kind of administer federal grants for homeless youth. And so I totally get the need. And I think for most people, it would work just fine, but it's for those people who are going to wind up in crisis where I think it could just be devastating. And so I think we need to look at models like pathways and things like that. There's a lot of for years, I've studied like permanent supportive housing models.
Yeah.
And you look at them all over the country, and there's the housing provider, and then they have a contractor, an MOU for the service providers within the building or
Mhm.
the homes. And I think that is having that separation. So if someone is in crisis and does lose their housing, they still have those services.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Joey, you're on mute, Joey.
My dog was barking, so I went.
No worries.
Um, I saw in the recommendations that you be proposing funding for professional development of AHS contractors and direct service workers, as well as a need for funding for the purchase of motels and hotels. And given the current um, new layout of the legislature, how possible do you think that is to advance? And did you have any numbers?
No, I mean, this is all just very preliminary kind of stuff. We didn't have access to the, like having joint fiscal sit in on the committee and do calculations for us. So a lot of these things are just very basic kind
Mhm.
of values, I would say. But and so yeah, I don't know. On one hand, those things are expensive and would cost money. But those finding places to reduce our dependency on the motel and hotel voucher program, then those are the things we need to spend money on. So, folks kind of can't have it both ways. And so those will really be the kind of one-on-one conversations we'll have to be really having with people on the fence. And even who may initially feel opposed, that, we do have to, we have to make some sort of investment or things will continue to spiral out of control and become more costly. To address, and cause a whole lot of harm in the meantime.
VIA has been very, we were very interested in 829 because it offered a long-term plan. Um,
Mhm.
do you feel like that? I mean, some of the task force recommendations are clearly thinking that way. Um,
Mhm.
where do you think that is given the administration's reluctance to spend money on this?
Yeah, I mean, 829 depended on a really on an increase on those kind of in the highest tax bracket.
Yep.
And so, our governor is very firm in no new taxes or tax increases. So I don't know if that's going to be possible. To get, even within the Democratic caucus, we did not have unanimous
Mhm, mhm,
support for raising taxes on the wealthy. And so um, I that's one where I don't think we're going to get a veto
mhm,
override. That doesn't mean we don't try,
mhm,
and we continue having conversations, and we try and get those people. When maybe we can come to some, maybe not the gold standard, but maybe we can get them to come a little bit over. So, but yeah, I mean, the governor is very, very firm and consistent on not signing bills with
mhm,
increases on taxes
mhm,
or
mhm.
new
Jubilee,
taxes.
are you okay going just a couple minutes over, maybe to like 10 after?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So can I wanted to, on that topic of kind of an approach, it was mentioned the reimagining GA, and I do want to ask more questions about the recommendations. But there are a lot of issues associated with like delivering services at the point of need. And with the housing first model is great, but when you don't have housing, then you
Yeah.
still have a lot of people outside. So can you talk just a little bit about that, what your vision is of, and again, I know that like education spending is going to suck up like all the oxygen in the
Hmm.
legislature, but can you just talk a little bit about what that might look like, the reimagining GA?
Um, the reimagining, well, I know it's a goal of mine, and it is a goal of Teresa's to make this so it's not, GA no longer is this thing that gets wildly changed every 6 months, that it's a pretty predictable actual program rather than a benefit, that's got pretty predictable funding, and makes it so that our service providers and people experiencing a housing crisis in Vermont know what to expect, and can plan. And So I think that's really, one of the big things is we don't want all of our state service providers in the state scrambling on June 15th, preparing, sometimes not even having 2 weeks. Sometimes it's like things don't even get figured out and they're already into the new budget year. So I think that's a primary goal for mine. So there's not this panic around the budget adjustment and then the budget each year. It may not be ideal, but at least folks know what to expect, and can do some actual planning, which really isn't possible now. So that, and that would be a big change. In terms of the other reimagination, I'd like to get rid of the stigma around the hotels. And right now people think of the GA program and they think of dirty rundown hotels and crime. So when people think of the GA program, I want it to be something the public views as a positive in our communities, a positive resource in our communities. So I think those are my two really main kind of priorities. And then we've got to figure out the details on how we get there.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering how you could advise us, Jubilee, on how VIA could be supportive, help advance some of the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, the House continues to be more, I think, welcoming and receptive to these ideas overall. So really working on talking with senators. But the House is also still people need to be pushed and remember what they were thinking and how they were feeling, over the summer when we saw, or this fall, when we saw families in, mass quantities being forced into tents. When we saw multiple people die in a week in Vermont, who were unsheltered. So, we also helping to kind of maintain that pressure on people in the House. I think, yeah, just having that presence and talking to legislators one-on-one, really personal conversations, bringing in lived experience whenever and wherever you can. It gets very easy to kind of get caught up in the budget and the charts and the tables. And it is so helpful, I know, for me personally, to be able to recenter on human beings. And I know a lot of people in the State House care. And so making those connections and remembering that all of these decisions, all of these things we're talking about, ultimately we're talking about people and our neighbors. And so drawing that connection whenever and wherever possible is really, really important.
Quick
Yeah,
follow-up.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
We've talked about in the organization about postcard campaigns, or I'm just wondering, when you say personal conversations, is it over the phone these days? Is it at the State House? How do you
Yeah,
see those happening?
I think on the phone, having people call up their legislators or legislators they know. It's really easy to throw out, to glance at a postcard and then throw it in with all of the 50 papers and postcards and flyers and things we get in our mailboxes each week. But those personal conversations, talking about their kind of bringing them back into their communities. So really making it about their community, and the people that they are serving and know, and live with for the majority of the year. I think that's really important. It's easy to get mass kind of more engagement. Sometimes it feels better to hit all the legislators and send an email to all the legislators and have a bunch of people send the same email. But really, I mean, it goes into like campaigning um, and and all of that. Really, those conversations are really what moves people. So in this case, I think as many um, actual conversations, and I don't think the method matters. I think, you know, writing a personal email to is fine, a phone call, invite them out, like, hey, can we grab some coffee on Saturday, or you know, um, things like that. Really making that human to human connection.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Speaking of human connections, in Addison County at the Housing Coalition meeting last week, we noted that in the month for the month previous in December, more of our neighbors became unhoused. Now the number is 40 between 0 and 17 years of age. It's remained at 74 between 18 and 61, but in its 15, it increased for ages 62 and over. And each one of those numbers is a person. And that's one of
Yeah.
the things that, as you know, in Addison County, we're pretty good at having relationships with people.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very fortunate to have um, neighbors, and as they are in Burlington and in Rutland and Washington County as well, that do care about the individuals. In terms of in terms of direct citizen engagement, this is something that I think a lot of people of faith struggle with in terms of when and this is not a derogatory comment, but when we read reports like this one, it's very social services centric. And
Yeah.
so it's unclear sometimes on how citizens can not just donate or advocate, but actually get involved and create relationships that are going to make a difference in people's lives. Uh, so to that end, I mean, do you see any opportunities for people, like for members of VIA or others, to become more engaged in the process? Maybe in oversight or grant management or anything like that. Do you see any opportunities where those kinds of connections can increase?
Um, I just want to make sure I'm getting what you're asking. Do you mean like in the legislative process or the actual administration of these types of programs? Or
Well, so at the end, we talked a little bit. So case management is a black box. It's
Mhm.
something when you say it, most people are not going to know what you mean, right?
Yeah,
So all social services providers are going to know what that means, but frankly, my mother wouldn't know what that means.
yeah,
But yet there are what we know about case management, those of us who've done it, is really it doesn't succeed unless people and community have relationships with these people that we're serving.
yeah,
And so really, a lot of us think that might be the answer is more neighbor engagement with people who are in need. And so um, the systems, though, the
hmm,
human services systems don't always support that because of things like privacy or,
hmm.
a release of information. Those things can all be worked through, but I'm just wondering, like in terms of you have experience on all sides of this issue, um, are there going to be opportunities to increase that kind of connection between Vermonters who are not who don't work in social services, but who might be members of the congregation? Like, what would you say to them in terms of how they could become involved, whether it be legislatively or just in their community?
Yeah, well, legislatively is very easy. Thankfully, I think we live in the best state for legislative engagement. You know, I only have experience on my one committee, but I know most of us read, you know, every every email, every public comment we get. We have an amazing committee assistant, and she makes sure to send everything our way. And so really, let us know your thoughts. Submit public testimony. Anyone can do that at any time. Come, come in person if you can. We have a really open legislature. You can come right in and sit in on our committees and listen in when you are interested in something that's going on. And then, if a legislator said something that you agreed with, or you wanted to talk to them more about, like, say, hey, can we grab lunch, or can I talk to you for 10 minutes? So our legislature, it is very easy to be engaged and reach people. And if you don't do it, the only people who are doing it is lobbyists. And some of them are great, and then some of them are, advocating for things that are kind of opposite from my morals and my goals for Vermont. In terms of communities, that one I like how to to get engaged in communities, show up, find out about these task force. Joy, it's something you did, coming to the Housing and Homelessness Alliance and things like that. And that's where you can find out about committees. I think talking to churches, show up, get involved in your town politics, like show up, join by Zoom or go in person when there are select board meetings. I think that's going to actually become more and more important, because I think if there are calls for tightening the budget and cuts, more and more is going to fall on our towns and cities. So we need people who are sitting in those rows holding, their select board or their city council accountable and kind of advocating for these values we have. The one thing, I'm not sure how we could legislatively create an avenue for that. Like you said, we really, like the language of this, it's very hard because, all of the things we do in our committees, it is law. And so it has to be phrased in certain ways. And there's like these definitions. I've learned so much about the process. So it gets really, there are some things we can't force, and so that's where we get, we have federal privacy laws and things that we have to keep in mind. So, but I'm going to think about that more, and I'd love to hear your ideas, because it sounds like you've thought about this quite a bit. So, yeah, submit public comments if you have thoughts about that.
Okay.
I'd just like to ask, coming back to your task force,
Yeah.
what would be public comments that would be helpful in advancing your recommendations? Is it to say I'm commenting before or on January 8th, that I think these are great recommendations and I specifically like blah, blah, blah.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, it can be that simple. Even better if you have the time, or, you want to work with someone, is fine. Like I said, bring it back to humans, to people. If like, hey, adding, one of the things we added to the eligibility was for youth who were exiting state care, that transition age youth who we know are so vulnerable. But we were finding, even with our YDP resources, we have about 72 youth who were no longer eligible for hotels, and are living in cars and hopping from couch to couch and getting into really unsafe situations. So we added that in. So if a
Mhm.
youth, someone who's like 18 to 24 who exited foster care. um, see if you can share their story or a little bit. I think anytime you can talk about the policy but connect it to a human being,
Yeah,
that is the probably one of the most impactful things and you can be doing with legislators.
yeah, yeah. Certainly in Burlington, my lived experience has been talking with the people in the tents on the waterfront
Mm-hmm.
and just imagining what it's like for them in this weather.
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're also going to have Jerome Hazelwood, who Capstone, one of the folks that I served here, and we had to send him to Pierre Motel because we didn't have any, as you know, we don't have enough motel housing in Addison County.
Mm-hmm.
But you're definitely going to hear some great stories, I think, as the session goes by in terms of motivating stories to call for action because action's
Right.
absolutely required. Is there anything else that we didn't ask you about
Good.
that you would like us to know, Jubilee?
Oof. Um, no, really, as just, yeah, please show up, please send us emails, and please reach out. I will say I am working on a bill that kind of goes along with this that would create, it'll kind of be a multi-year bill. First, I'd like to, the first part will create kind of a committee or a group to create a training program and create a peer counseling program in Vermont specifically for folks experiencing homelessness. So the first part of the bill would be, kind of creating what that curriculum would look like, topics, things like that, to actually be the criteria for certification. And then, once we had that, then we would create the actual program. So I'd love to know if you have any thoughts about that. Um, as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking some time. Are you available for follow-ups as well? I assume you are.
Yeah, reach out
Okay,
anytime.
okay, super.
I have a pretty hectic. I work 20 hours a week during the legislative session, and just lost my childcare, so I am
Oh
going to be
gosh.
commuting back and forth every day.
Yeah.
So it may be like a car session on the way to and from, but
Oh, gosh. So
I will
sorry to
do
hear
my
that.
best.
Uh, yeah. And public comment is open until January 10th, right?
Hey,
Do we 8th?
8th. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but then you can always, I mean, the legislature will be in session, so if you don't, that is just like really, if you have specific comments on this,
Mhm.
on the report, and then the legislature, we are in session next Wednesday. So then you can start submitting public comments directly to our committee. And don't just send them to our committee, send them to the Senate one as well, Senate Health and Welfare when it's time.
mhm,
Great.
mhm.
All right. Well,
Thank you
thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have a great day.
You
And
Thank
too.
you.
I hope to hear from you throughout the session.
Thank you for all
We
your
will.
work. Really
Oh, thank
appreciate it.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.